Good evening. Good evening. I think we better close the bar, otherwise we'll never get people to sit down. So, good evening, all. If I could ask people to have a seat. Thank you. And good evening again. And welcome. Welcome to this convening on preserving our values and commitments. And thank you all so much for joining us for this important discussion tonight. This evening, we're going to explore how our community has responded in the face of the extraordinary challenges of this past year. Our goal is to squarely face the question of whether we are meeting the test of our time, and to think about how we can work together even more effectively in 2018 and beyond. You know, it's a remarkable reflection of these extraordinary times that we even feel the need to come together to talk of how we can best preserve the values and commitments that have built and sustained our community. And yet, to see you all here, and I was going to say this anyway, but I really mean it when I look around this room, to see you all here and to think about all those with whom the Foundation has been engaged this past year, so many people who are committed to stand up for the people of this community and its timeless values and its timeless commitments. That is itself a most powerful statement that our community is unbowed and is determined to move forward. So I thank you all for that. I thank you all for all you do, and I thank you for being with us tonight. I want to extend particular thanks to our three panelists, Alice Forrester, Michael Taylor, and Kika Matos. These are three of our community's truly extraordinary leaders. They are three leaders who are on the front lines of the battles and struggles of 2017, and they are three leaders who we look to blaze a trail forward for all of us. So we're privileged to have the opportunity to hear from them this evening, and I'll introduce them in a few moments. But before I do, and before we get to the conversation with the panelists, I would like to set some context from the perspective of the Community Foundation. It was exactly 1 year ago at the College Street Music Hall on a very cold and rainy night, and I'm sure some of you were with us. It was at a foundation gathering not unlike this one that we came together as a community to look ahead in the aftermath of the 2016 election and the bitterly divisive campaign that had preceded it. We said that night that the challenge before us would be to do the work of community in the face of a new reality, the reality that a profound sense of division was casting a dark shadow over the country. We resolved that night to recommit to one another and to our shared future. We resolved to remember that our diversity has always been among our greatest strengths as a community and remains today a touchstone for how we move forward. And we resolved that night to stand up for those on the front lines of resistance to the forces that would try to drive us apart. Looking back over the last 12 months, we gather tonight neither to congratulate ourselves nor to wallow in our struggles, but rather to take stock of how the core values and commitments that define our community are weathering the storms. And we gather tonight to look forward and to declare again our support for one another as we face the tests yet to come. What are the values of which I speak? Inclusion, generosity of spirit, unity. A community built on these values is what we all inherited from those who came before us in this place, and is what we must pass on to those who will follow us here. And our commitment to come together, to stand together, and to work together each day, both to address our needs and to understand and pursue our future opportunities. To come together, to stand together, and to work together, that's the very definition of a successful community. So let's be clear. The challenges we face both in Connecticut and in our country have been long in coming. They didn't spring fully developed like Athena from the head of Zeus from the choices that the voters made in 2016. Really, since 1980, for more than a generation, our values as a national community have been anchored in the idea that the common good in our country is simply the sum total of our material welfare as individuals. The very idea of the common good in America has withered. And so, as we have grown more prosperous over these decades, we have also grown apart as well, into a society defined more by inequality than by community. Not only wealth, but also hope and the promise of opportunity for the next generation have more and more become the privilege of the few. As in our country, so too in our state. For Connecticut, 2017 has been a humbling time of reckoning. Reckoning with the effects of an economy that has been growing too slowly for a generation, leaving us with a state budget that no longer supports the level of public investment that is needed to create the kind of society that we want to live in and that we aspire to leave to the next generation. So we have been headed for many years in directions that have felt unsettling or perhaps worse. Yet the events of 2017 really have been a departure point, as the forebodings that we spoke of on College Street last fall have become reality. This year, the divisions in our national life have been deliberately deepened and widened. Our leaders exalt exclusion over inclusion. People are singled out and demonized for political purposes by virtue of their religion or their ethnicity. Blatant demonstrations of hatred are uncondemned, as if we do not know from history where these darkest of all of humanity's demons can lead us once they are let loose. Democratic institutions that serve to check the excesses of the majority, the courts, the free press, face daily attacks. And our common efforts to ameliorate our destabilizing inequities, from the Affordable Care Act to DACA protections for young immigrants to criminal justice reform, are undermined and rolled back. Now, I realize how partisan this sounds, but tonight I'm not talking about politics and I'm not talking about policy. We can have those discussions. I'm talking about community. For it is the very idea of community that has been under assault in our country in 2017. Those very values of inclusion, generosity of spirit, and unity. It is the idea of community as we have long practiced it here. The very idea that sustainable change and progress is that which benefits the many and not the few that we have needed to defend in 2017. And in that defense, our community needs advocacy, not neutrality. Neutrality is not an asset when our community is under attack. And make no mistake, our values are under attack, as are the local nonprofit institutions that embody those values and the vulnerable and needy among us who utilize the services of those nonprofits. And of course, we need to do more than defend. We need a path forward, a path defined by more than different public policies and different leaders, a path grounded in the core values of community. For if we are in a battle, it's a battle for hearts and minds. Will we accept that progress is only possible through a winner-take-all mentality, or do we believe that social progress can be widely shared? And so I submit to you that our task, all of us, those who do the work of community at the local level in Greater New Haven and in so many other communities around the country, our task is to reassert the values of caring, of generosity, of inclusion, and of unity. Therein lies our path forward. Throughout this past year, the Foundation's shorthand way of trying to capture all of this has been community now more than ever. It's been our message, it's our watchword. It's been the touchstone for much of our work with our donors, with our nonprofits, with our board and staff as well, with many of you. No matter the context, community now more than ever is our way of saying that for all of us who are committed to the future of this place and its people, acting on our commitments has never been more important. And community now more than ever is not just about values. As always, inescapably, it's about money too. For so many nonprofits in Greater New Haven, the state budget has been challenge number one in 2017. Set against the backdrop of a nonprofit sector that has grown too dependent on state support, the 4-month delay this year in enacting a state budget has created a level of uncertainty and chaos not seen before. For any number of smaller nonprofits, the state budget catastrophe was nothing less than an existential threat, and several have closed their doors. Many local institutions, small and large alike, have pared back services and have shut down programs. For nonprofits providing services in areas such as healthcare and immigration, and we'll talk about this with the panel, where federal policy is also in flux, the uncertainty of 2017 meant both brutally difficult decisions about services in the immediate term and the need to reassess or abandon long-term institutional plans that had been put together in a totally different time. As the Connecticut budget fight went on and on over the summer, the Connecticut Nonprofit Alliance surveyed nonprofits in the state. Fully 80% of them anticipated staff layoffs, and half were planning to eliminate programs, reduce staff hours, and cut salaries. Put straightforwardly, Connecticut's nonprofits have just not faced this kind of budget crisis in the past. Now, sometimes very bad news can feel like a relief when one is anticipating something even worse. And I've heard this sense of relief from several local nonprofit executives since the state budget was finally enacted last month. Yet our friends at Connecticut Voices for Children warn us against exhaling so readily. Voices tells us that the percentage of the state budget going to the broad swath of programs affecting children and families, including health care, early childhood, K-12, education, social services, and higher ed, is at an all-time low in the budget that the state adopted in 2017, last month. And the percentage of the state budget going to those services has declined by almost a third since the early 1990s, in the last 25 years. And Voices points out in its budget analysis also that given the provisions in the budget capping future state spending, there is little likelihood of turning this trend line around at any time in the foreseeable future. The Foundation's grant-making this year reflected these realities. We worked with our friends at United Way to understand the depth and the breadth of the impact of state budget cuts on local nonprofits, and the Foundation's October grant decisions were geared toward general operating support for organizations feeling those impacts. To keep ourselves on top of a rapidly changing environment, throughout the year the Foundation has probed more deeply into areas that have been particularly vulnerable to the change winds of 2017, including nonprofit media, immigration, healthcare access, and its impact on racial and ethnic health disparities, women's issues, and the rise in hate-inspired incidents. Much of this work took the form of briefings for our donors, and I've been very pleased that our donors have responded in turn with additional support for local nonprofits working in these areas. Yet in Greater New Haven, and just like around the country, donor response to the challenges of 2017 has been highly uneven. Organizations on the front lines of high-profile battleground issues have seen spikes in fundraising, including, as I understand it, local organizations such as Planned Parenthood of Southern New England, IRIS and its work with refugees, and the Connecticut chapter of the ACLU. Local social service organizations, on the other hand, many of which have been deeply hurt by the state budget, have generally not seen significant increases in giving. And the Foundation regularly hears the concern from nonprofits that donor attention is shifting from social services and the arts to issues that have had a higher profile this year. Now, beyond all of these specifics, I do want to say that doing our work with nonprofits and donors this year has felt very different. There is a palpable yearning in this community to come together, to find comfort in a shared cause. It's stronger than it's been in the past. Time and time again this year, I've heard people have asked me, I've heard this yearning in people's question, what can we do? What can we do together? And tonight I can say that I think we've done much as a community. Indeed, I believe there's much for our community to be proud of in the ways that we have reasserted our community values, core values and commitments this year. Certainly that's true with regard to immigration. For our community, built by immigrants and continually being renewed by successive waves of immigrants, a community where the contributions of both documented and undocumented immigrants are well established, including by a Foundation report that we did a couple of years ago. The dramatic changes in U.S. immigration policy this year have required a total about-face. The community was quick to prepare for the possibility of large-scale deportations, and I'm very proud of the grant the foundation made early in the year to support this preparedness planning. And when the deportation orders began to be issued, the community showed its true mettle. The clergy, together with neighborhood leaders and activists and elected officials, came together and came forward to open our arms and open our doors to people facing deportation. So in July, when Nuri Chavarria walked out of Ecclesia de Dios Pentecostal Church on East Pearl Street in Fairhaven into the arms of her children, or last week when Marco Reyes Alvarez walked out of First and Summerfeld Church on Elm Street into the embrace of his family, this community had much to be proud of. We saw this people not as Guatemalans or Ecuadorians, not as residents of Norwalk or Meriden, not by reference to their immigration status or history, but as part of who we are as a community. And if one wonders what inclusion and generosity of spirit look like in real life, go back and look at the pictures, the photographs of Ms. Chavarria and Mr. Alvarez that were published when they emerged from their sanctuaries. Look at their faces in those pictures. We've seen this same resolve in other areas too. We've seen it among women in our community. The women of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority were among the first, bringing together the NAACP and Junta for Progressive Action and Planned Parenthood within a week of the 2016 election for a conversation that grew into a series of community fora under the title Conversations That Matter. And propelled by the historic Women's March last January, women in our community have been organizing in new ways this year too. Emerge Connecticut was founded in 2017. It's an affiliate of Emerge America with the goal of increasing the number of women holding public office. And Ella's List was launched as well to build the bench of women leaders in our state. Our unity was on vivid display at the annual meeting of our Community Fund for Women and Girls in June, which featured Linda Sarsour, a Palestinian-American leader from New York. Ms. Sarsour's appearances have had a highly divisive effect in other communities, but here she was welcomed without incident or objection, and her message to New Haven was all about strengthening community across lines of race, religion, and ethnicity. When you build communities, she told us, you are learning how not to let the past repeat itself. So there is much to be proud of, but we need to recognize, too, that we can and must do better. The times demand it of us. When New Haven stepped up as a sanctuary city last winter, for example, there was widespread support, but other voices were heard, too, questioning why our city would put federal funds at risk by supporting the undocumented when those funds are so important to American citizens living in our community. It may have seemed at the time just like a small crack in our unity, in our unified face, but these are the kinds of superficial scratches that can grow into deep wounds if they're not diagnosed and treated. And now more than ever, we can't afford deep wounds. We've seen these wounds at the level of individual nonprofits, where the conflicting pressures to both advocate at the policy level and to provide services at the client level have created strains not previously seen. And we've seen these wounds at a broader level, too, such as in the search for a new superintendent for New Haven Public Schools, a process that the New Haven Independent this week called quote, an explosion of incivility and division, a process that I dare say will now make the work of our soon-to-be-hired new superintendent much more difficult. Nothing is more important to this community than K-12 education. So now it falls to all of us to come together to support the new leader of our school system in her efforts to provide the best possible education for New Haven's young people. I could continue to talk about what has happened this year, both positive and not so positive, but I want to say a bit about how the community is thinking about these issues as we look forward so we can then get to our panel. In 2018, the Foundation will continue our work to engage our donors in the issues of the day, offering a continuing series of donor briefings and other community gatherings. Donor engagement is always at the heart of what we do, and that is and will be true now more than ever. And 2018 is shaping up to be the year in which mission-related investments become a much larger part of the Foundation's work. I'll say more about that as the year progresses, but I think that can make a big difference in our work in the coming year. And as we finalize our plans and budgets for next year, the Foundation is also considering several new programmatic strategies as well. We expect to expand our already robust capacity building work by investing more deeply in nonprofits that are exploring major changes to their business models to adjust to new public sector funding realities? Are there new collaborations that can help local institutions manage through these times? Are there new revenue models that should be pursued? Our goal is to be helpful to important organizations as they explore these kinds of issues. Secondly, we're going to focus on nonpartisan voter registration. Engagement in the democratic process, always essential, has never been more important. Too often we see low voter turnout among the very people that are served by the nonprofit organizations that the Foundation supports. And we know that these nonprofits are a good avenue for reaching these individuals. Much is at stake in 2018 with elections at the gubernatorial and congressional levels, and an investment in mobilizing voter registration next year, working with and through our nonprofits, can also be a prelude to continuing this work as we move toward the 2020 census and the presidential election in that year. And thirdly, in this time when both the credibility and the business model of traditional media are under unprecedented strain, the Foundation recognizes that our journalism work, which has been going on for a decade now, has never been more important. So we plan to deepen our engagement in this area and are also working with other community foundations in the state on that. For all of this, there is every reason to believe that our community will experience 2018 as a continuing time of division and of vulnerability and of limited horizons. So if, as I said before, the larger struggle we are in is one for hearts and minds, what our community needs even more than new programs and new resources is a sense of hope. Hope grounded in the belief that we in Greater New Haven remain committed to the values of inclusion, generosity, and unity. Hope grounded in the belief that we in Greater New Haven remain together. That whatever may lie before us, we will continue to come together, to stand together, and to work together to create opportunity and to support the people and institutions among us that are particularly vulnerable in this time. And I know I'm preaching to the converted here. You all are our foot soldiers in coming together and working together. We have taken the liberty in your materials of suggesting ways in which the Foundation could be of assistance to you as you do that going forward. So this is the work of all of us who are committed to the future of Greater New Haven. And as I said at the outset, to see you all here, to know that many more who are not here are equally committed, is what gives me confidence that we will in the end be equal to the challenges of this time. And while the privilege and the burdens of undertaking this work of community falls on all of us and each of us, it falls disproportionately on our leaders. And tonight we are joined on the panel, which we're going to start now, by three of this community's most extraordinary leaders. So I would ask Alice and Mike and Kika to come up, if I may. Yeah, there are seats down here, so if people are standing in the back, please feel free to come forward. So we're going to have this panel discussion. We're going to have a Q&A afterwards, so I hope you'll all be thinking of questions you want to ask our panelists, and then we're going to have a reception in the other room so we can continue the discussion. So let me make these introductions. Alice Forrester, Executive Director of Clifford Beers Clinic, a 104-year-old New Haven institution, one of the great institutions of our community for over a century that provides a wide array of services to address the mental, physical, and social issues affecting its clients, all with the goal of improving the health, resiliency, and quality of life for children, for families, and for communities. Clifford Beers works with some of the most vulnerable in our community and in some of the most difficult circumstances imaginable, as we all saw through its extraordinary work and Alice's extraordinary work in Sandy Hook in recent years. Clifford Beers Clinic is all about hope, and I was just talking about hope. The word is right in its logo, and its annual Builders of Hope event, breakfast event, is one of the great highlights on our community's calendar. Alice herself, as much as anyone in our community, is the personification of hope. So, Alice, welcome.
Thank you.
Kika Matos is Director of Immigrant Rights and Racial Justice at the Center for Community Change in Washington, D.C. Yet, of course, those of us here in this room and in our community know her as a great local leader. In the past, she served as Deputy Mayor in New Haven with Mayor DeStefano and ran Junta for Progressive Action. She's a woman of deeply held principles and of many causes. And what runs through all of those principles and all of those causes is her passion for social justice and her fierce and skilled advocacy. She is a nationally recognized leader in the fight for immigrant rights and comprehensive immigration reform. And she has been the spearhead, oftentimes out front, but when she's not out front, she's behind the scenes as well, in so much of what we have done as a community in support of our immigrant population, as I was referring to a couple of minutes ago. Kika is also chair of the board of the Community Foundation. For another month, that is, where she'll give up the chair and roll off our board at the end of this year, sad to say. So this, Kika, is the first of what I trust will be several opportunities to express my deep gratitude and my enormous admiration for what you have contributed in your 7 years of devoted service to the foundation and what you contribute long before that and will continue to long after that to this community. So thank you very much. And as I thank Kika for that, I also want to recognize two Kika's predecessor as foundation chair, Will Caldwell, who is sitting here in the front row. Will's board term ends next month, as does Kika's. Will was chair for 2 years prior to Kika taking the chair this year. And like Kika, Will Caldwell has been a great leader on our board in many different capacities, who has done so much to shape the foundation, its work, its priorities since 2011. He's a lifelong resident of this community whose deep and abiding commitment to it and love for it has been so evident in his tireless devotion to our work. So thank you very much, Will Caldwell. I'm deeply grateful to you as well, as I trust you know. Thank you. And our third panelist, Michael Taylor, Chief Executive Officer of the Cornell Scott Hill Health Center. I always stumble over the name Cornell Scott Hill Health Center because Scotty was a friend of mine, and it's hard when local institutions are named after your friends. Since its founding in 1968 on Congress Avenue as the first community health center in Connecticut, the Cornell Scott Hill Health Center has for almost half a century. We're looking forward to a big birthday party next year, Mike. Been one of this community's truly indispensable institutions. Today, Hill Health provides care to more than 36,000 patients annually in Greater New Haven and the Lower Naugatuck Valley, including many services provided at reduced fees for uninsured patients meeting federal income guidelines. And just today, I'm not making the announcement, a press release was issued this afternoon, but it's directly relevant to this. Just today, Hill Health issued a joint announcement along with Fairhaven Community Health Care, and I saw Sue Lagarde, so I want to, wherever she is, I want to give her a shout out too. Hill Health Center and Fairhaven Community Health and Yale New Haven Hospital announced the establishment today of a new innovative collaboration to improve primary health care delivery in our community. This is exactly the kind of innovative coming together that these times demand. Bravo. Mike Taylor is a deeply experienced healthcare executive who has been at Hill Health since 2010. Under his leadership, the center has greatly expanded its services and its impact and has reclaimed its historic role at the center of how primary health care is delivered to the people of this community. Yet when one talks to Mike about the center and the challenges of this time, he always responds in terms of his patients, the people of this community, and the challenges they face. Indeed, in the CEO statement that he has posted on the Foundation's Give Greater website, Mike focuses on the, quote, community of caring that Hill Health has created to provide person-centered, integrated care to improve the lives of so many patients and families across our community. That is what he is all about. Mike, thank you as well for being here. So I'm going to sit down and be quiet and start this dialogue. And I want to start with talking about, I've been talking about the community and talking about institutions. Let's talk about people. And let's talk about your clientele at Clifford Beers, at Hill Health, and the people, Kika, you work with in the immigrant community. At a time when the leadership elements in our country seem to be engaged in a concerted effort to further marginalize vulnerable populations, politically, programmatically, rhetorically, how are you seeing people respond, I think, is a really important question. You all, as I said before, are on the front lines. Are you seeing more despair? Are you seeing more resolve? Maybe both. Is the reaction that's emerging something altogether different? What's it look like on the front lines with the people that you and your staff interact with every day? Maybe Alice, let's start with you.
Sure. The week before Thanksgiving, I had an opportunity to join a parent advisory committee that we have at the clinic that we started. It's a wellness committee, and they've been meeting for about a year and a half, led by Tirza Kemp, who works at the agency as our community manager. And it was one of the most moving experiences I've had a long time at the clinic. These parents have, all of the issues that, you think of folks who need mental health services with their kids at Clifford Beers. And they have committed to actually learning data, to run for office, to look at what are the issues in the school system that are addressing their children. They have made a year-long commitment to actually get trained and learn and lead. And, to me, that was really different. We've had parent groups and parent advisory groups for many, many years at the agency. But this time, I felt this incredible power. I mean, they welcomed me to the room. They owned the room. They owned the space. And they see themselves as the leaders, of what's going to happen. So, I was incredibly moved. And so I think that there's a large contingency of people who feel like this is the time to step up now. And this is the time for questioning authority and becoming authority. I also want you to understand that the enormity of the need is just unbelievable. We are getting referrals on a daily basis. We have open access. We're having hundreds and hundreds of people coming seeking services. So the stress and the anxiety of what is happening right now really is driving a lot of mental health struggles.
Mike, how about you? How are you
I'd
feeling
say,
and seeing the same things?
I'd say the reaction has evolved. Starting, I would say, immediately after the election of fear and vulnerability, and really about the uncertainty that the future seemed to hold. But much like what Alice just articulated, I think as time has progressed, and people have become, I hate saying this, but it seems people have become accustomed to a new norm, and one that is aggressive, one that is not inclusive, one that is quite frankly bigoted in many regards. People have found their resolve and their legs. So I'm encouraged, and again, that people now understand, and I would say this is particularly germane to the younger population, have come to understand now the importance of participation in the political process and what can happen when you don't. So I think that's a great outcome of a situation that remains an extraordinary challenge for many people.
Well, I hear resolve from both, that you're both seeing that, and I mentioned the voter registration work that we're going to be doing with and through nonprofits, organizations like yours. It sounds like the ground is fertile for that.
I think people have found their fighting spirit again, and I'm very pleased to see that.
So, Kika, how about you? You work with a population that may have reasons not to come forward in quite the same way. Yeah. What's your sense of this?
So let me start off, like Alice, with what my Thanksgiving was like, and not to be self-referential, but to try to contextualize the struggles that immigrants are facing. The Thanksgiving, and I don't mean to out my husband, but Thanksgiving is the one day of the year when he actually prepares a meal. So I was really excited. I was really excited to think that, that there were going to be a few days where we would wind down and settle into Thanksgiving mode. And 3 days before Thanksgiving, I get a call from Glenn Formica, who's an immigration lawyer, and he said, and he and I worked on the Nuri Chavarria case. He said, I really need your help again. I've got a client, Miriam Martinez. She went to her visit with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. She's been living here for over 20 years. He said they did the same thing with Nuri. They strapped an ankle bracelet on her and told her she had a month to get out of the country. Now, Miriam has a 12-year-old daughter, Brianna, who has type 1 diabetes, and her case is so severe that Miriam and her husband take turns all night monitoring her because she could literally die if her sugar levels drop. So, I didn't even tell Henry because I figured he'd have a meltdown if I said, hey, listen, I know it's Thanksgiving, but I need to work on this case. Of course I said yes. And so the battle during the week of Thanksgiving was a battle to try to keep Miriam, her daughter, and her husband together. I'm happy to report that the day before Thanksgiving, Glenn managed to get a stay of deportation for Miriam. It's not over. She has to go before a judge. But at least they were thankful on Thursday to be together. I spent my Thanksgiving with my son's godmother and her son, who is a student at City University of New York, and he is DACA-mented. His DACA status is going to expire in 2018. So, I try really hard to keep it upbeat and to talk, have a good conversation, but the level of despair in this young man's face, because we've always talked about his future. Because of DACA, he was able to apply for university. Because of DACA, he's able now to almost finish his studies, but his future, a year from now, will be radically different. He will have to stop working because he will lose his work permit. He will have some challenges getting scholarship, and then he will be one of 800,000 young people who will now soon be subject to deportation unless Congress passes laws. And so this is, there's a lot of fear and despair, and these are just two examples. Immigrants are living lives filled with fear. U.S. citizen children of immigrant parents who are undocumented are living lives that none of us would want for any of our kids. There is some resolve, there is courage that I have never seen before in people who have the most to lose, but this is not normal, and this is nothing that we as a community should accept.
Do you feel, let's talk about DACA for a minute, and let's talk about these young people, and it's something we've seen at the Community Foundation, in particular one case, a young woman who has worked at the foundation. She's now working at Clifford Beers, and enormously talented, charismatic, just a bright light, and with a great future until DACA, the rug was pulled out from under her. Do you feel that these young people, obviously they're getting support from people like yourself and the attorney you mentioned and employers like Clifford Beers, and I'm sure like Hill Health too.
Yes.
Do you feel that they feel that this community is behind them to the extent that it needs to be?
I do, but they also feel a sense of helplessness. Because the fight really is a congressional fight. We can certainly wrap our arms around them and continue to protect and support them. But the reality is that unless, and I've been waging this battle at the national level with immigrant allies to try to get Congress to get it together to try to pass legislation before the end of the year. And so I've been working with a lot of dreamers. I've been working with the organization United We Dream, and there is rarely a meeting that happens when some young person who is affected by this and who's also in the fight doesn't break down, because this is an abstract for them. right? When Trump makes vulgar comments on his Twitter account, like he did these last few days, demonizing Muslims and talking about immigrants in disparaging ways. You know, when other legislators drag their feet, many of these young people are they're reaching that deadline when their status will expire, and they will then become part of the undocumented population that's living a life filled with fear. And let me say, some of these young people came to the U.S. when they were weeks old. They don't know any other country. They don't know any other life. And this idea that we as a society think it's okay to then start deporting them, to me, is very disturbing.
You know, we think we're going to talk about healthcare policy too, but we tend to think of healthcare institutions, healthcare policy, and immigration policy. But I'm sure that at your doors, Mike,
Every day.
Alice,
Many times a day.
that people, undocumented residents, young people with these DACA issues, you're seeing them too. What's your experience?
It's not just many of our patients, but it's as well many of our staff members who are victims of these policy shifts. And so internally, we've held a number now of town halls to try to understand better what the challenges are that they face and what we as their employer and their provider can do to the greatest extent possible to assist them so that they don't feel isolated, and so that if we can offer a helping hand, we figure out how to do that.
Yeah, and I think it's confusing actually, because when it's an employee, there's a financial consequence,
Yes.
Quite substantial,
Right.
In terms of attorney fees and things like that. Mm-hmm. And then you have dollars, but none. I mean, I don't have free dollars that are unencumbered from our mission to be able to sort of support an individual. And their process. And so it gets very confusing, because I lose sleep at night thinking, my goodness, what am I going to, how are we going to be able to solve this problem? And I'm going to talk to Kika after, actually, about some of the steps to take. But, so I'm experiencing it as as an employer, and how do we support with the limited resources we have? But I see my staff stress. I just want to say, do you know the hardest staffing issue is finding bilingual clinicians and care coordinators for our services? This is probably the biggest thing that we do every day. We have a Latino center, and we had to put a hold on our taking in new families. And I see my staff, overloaded, because they're trying to manage a large group of families. And every Monday they'll come in, we lost another one, another father left, a mother, and then that really breaks the family, and so they have that much more to take care of. So I think your town hall idea is excellent, and something we should all think of doing.
So the benefit of the town hall, and one of the things we found, is to develop a greater understanding of the challenges they face. So, if someone needs to go to a hearing, as an employer, we need to have a knowledge of that, so we have an understanding, and we can be more forgiving than we might be otherwise. Right. These little things can relieve a great deal of stress on people who are facing these challenges, that if you weren't assertive to find out, well, what's going on that's causing this person's change in behavior or productivity and a new sense of stress about them, you can't help unless you understand.
That's really true.
So let's shift gears a little bit. If the new administration in Washington has thrown immigration policy up in the air, I could argue they've thrown healthcare policy even further up in the air.
Do we have policy?
And it sure hasn't landed yet. So I'll just ask it this way: at Clifford Beer's clinic at Hill Health, talk about, if you would, the impact that the uncertainty about everything you knew and were planning on being thrown up in the air, and what it means for what it's meant for your institutions this year and how you're approaching the future, given the, say, unsettled is a vast understatement, state of federal health care policy.
So I've been, I'll start,
right
because you
ahead.
have an even harder story. So I've been the CEO for 10 years, and I worked as a student, for another 11 years and an employer. So I've been at Clifford Beers for a long time, and I don't think I could ever say there was a time where it was like, yes, we're settled, we have enough money, and we're going to be good, So you're primed in a leadership role of running a nonprofit and a healthcare, in particular, to be really trying to figure out what's next, and how do I pivot and keep going. Clifford Beers, at our 100th anniversary, made the commitment to really addressing healthcare reform and the triple aim of, improve the quality of care, improve the access, and reduce the cost. And we have, through various projects, really looked at, in a very deep way, what are the things that we can do to make sure that the families and children and families we serve are getting exactly what they need, not too much of anything, but what they need, and how can we prove that we have a value. We knew that if we didn't, as a mental health agency, sort of alone, we would just be ancillary. We were sort of told, you better get with the program or not. So we got with the program. And so we were a recipient of one of the CMS Healthcare Innovation Awards, and we're just finishing up. And I have data to prove it, have an ROI of about $665 per person per month of savings if you address the social determinants of health, if you help the whole family get their mental health services, and assist the healthcare network, which is just so, absolutely hard. So I have paper, thick studies that say that we have an ROI. But you know what? I'm not sure who cares anymore, right? I care, and I hope you care. I think the hospital will care because I think, that the pressures, the costs of healthcare is just extreme. I know our families care. Our families have to navigate a healthcare system that is unbelievably complex. So, I think what I've decided to do is just stick with what we're doing. Stay with what's the right method, what's the right thing for our families, how do we address it, get creative around, creating models of care for our families that address the social determinants and address the mental health and physical health issues, and just stay on course and let all this go around. And one day someone's going to care that we save people money, right? Don't you think? One day.
From your mouth.
I hope so, but we do.
My one word to describe the instability that we're now experiencing is ouch. And it is instability in every regard for organizations like mine. And so I can go down the list, starting with the experience here in the state of Connecticut. The recent economic climate and absence of a budget didn't help one bit. The outcome of that budget, in some respects, will provide greater instability because many families will lose their Medicaid coverage as a result of this budget. Others families will have their Medicaid coverage for dental services capped at $1,000 per member per year. What that will mean for our organization is a greater number of uninsured and underinsured people at a time when, if we were seeing escalating funding coming from the federal government, we might be better able to sustain that. However, that is not so. Instead, what we have is even more instability at the federal level because all organizations like mine, a federally qualified health center, who receive federal grants to subsidize care for the underserved, don't have funding approved yet. So much of that, as every month goes by, health centers are ending their current grant year where that funding is enabled and allocated. And we have until June 1st for the federal government to figure this out before 12% of our budget disappears.
Do you feel that you and the federally qualified health centers there's enough attention being paid to this issue?
No. Because if there were, and this, by the way, is in light of the fact that there have been numerous attempts already to repeal ACA. That does, no, you might, some might want to
repeal or destroy it.
Repeal, destroy, eliminate, evaporate, and now what we have, when those direct affronts failed, is something that some politicians are calling tax reform. It is not that. It is tax reductions to the wealthy. It is tax increases to those who are most vulnerable in our community. And it also includes the elimination of one of the foundational aspects of the Affordable Care Act, and that is mandatory coverage. And so with that, people's costs will go up. Will be heaped with a greater number of uninsured people. So when you boil all these things up together, you understand why my one-word reaction is ouch. Because this represents tremendous instability for not as much as, not just my organization, but the people we serve. We will always figure out, because we're so accustomed to doing that, how to stretch a dollar to serve people. We will always go to beyond even our own resources sometime to enable that service. But at some point, you reach a place of not being able to do that. So if all of this instability that I just talked about were indeed to come to fruition, we could be facing that day.
So the challenges are daunting, obviously. Let's talk for a moment about leadership in this environment and how it's changed, what it means for you, the three of you, as individual leaders, as leaders of institutions, as leaders of, and as community leaders. And I would point out in that context that New Haven and Greater New Haven is in a moment of significant leadership transition. A number of our most important institutions have new leaders or are in processes of searching for new leaders. If you step back and look at it, 2016, 17, 18, there are half a dozen institutions, from the colleges and universities to the public school system in New Haven to the Chamber of Commerce, et cetera, that are in leadership transition mode. So I would ask, how do you think the demands of leaders have changed in our community? How has it changed for you? What advice would you give new leaders in this community dealing with the issues that we're all dealing with and talking about tonight? And I'll start with you, Kika.
Leave the country immediately for the next 3 years.
Kika does have a home outside the country, just for the record.
Get out of here.
Which one would we go to?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's another challenge. Look, in all
Any other advice?
In all seriousness, I think this moment calls for every single person to step up and fight with a level of ferocity that we haven't fought before. Fight for the most vulnerable, fight to protect our democracy, fight to protect the democratic institutions that strengthen our democracy. Because if we don't, I keep saying that, and I don't mean to be like a drama queen, I really have this fear that we will see the demise of our democracy in ways that will be irreparable. I have challenged my colleagues and my staff, and I say, whatever you haven't done before. So I'll give you an example. I have a very dear sister who makes money for a living, And for a long time, she's very proud of what I do. She's very supportive. But she is one of many people who I am friends or family with who have always felt like, I'll leave the advocacy to you, right? I'll really happy that you're doing that. I got other things to do, right? I got places to go. I got people to see. That's not really my thing. And I have encouraged her, and I've encouraged other people like her to say, you don't have that luxury anymore. Right? Now more than ever, everybody needs to step up. Now, does that mean that you put your body on the line and participate in civil disobedience? Not if it's not your thing. But that means showing up at rallies. That means signing petitions. That means, if there's something happening on the green, that means calling your member of Congress. And I am happy to say this story has a happy ending, which is that around the Nuri Chavarria case, at the very beginning, we had a press conference. And I was at the podium. I don't even remember what I was saying, and I looked over and I thought, oh my God, that looks like my sister. And then when I finished, I started desperately looking for her, thinking, was that a mirage? And it was her. And she said, I turned on Channel 8, and I heard a voice that sounded familiar, and then I thought, oh my God, it's you. So I had to come see you. And she's been really, this has transformed her in ways that I'm really happy about, and I have seen other people that I have never known to be engaged in this way show up in ways that really matter.
Mike, leadership.
So I'll restate a comment that I shared with our senior leadership team. I guess it was maybe 2 months or so after the election, when it was clear that the future was going to be different from the past. And what I said to them is, buck up. Because now is the time when those who depend on us need us most. So all of you, settle down. Remember who you are and what's important to us. And together we will figure this out. And that, to me, is when leadership either reveals itself or you are left without it.
Well said. Alice.
Echoing both what you said, I have 3 sisters. Can you contact them?
Right.
It's interesting. I was thinking what I would say. I think leadership, a little bit what you were saying is that it calls for a different stance. And it calls right now for courage. In areas that, as a leader of a nonprofit, that I've been able to kind of avoid. Like, for example, racial equity. Please don't walk away here thinking Clifford Beers doesn't address racial equity. We have a very serious interest in it. But I never gathered my staff together to talk about the injustice of race and being black, frankly, in our country. And I mandated a staff meeting last September, which I never do, but we gathered together. We have to go to the JCC, and we had Enola Aird and Dr. Cheryl Grills present on the 400 years of slavery and what its legacy has been. And I had staff members, and staff members were like, why do I have to be here? And we're like, okay, let's explain it to you why you have to be here. And they were not asking because they're racist or they're not concerned, but they're thinking that they know everything, and that's it's important. So raising issues around racial equity and talking about racism in an open way, to talk about our value of cultural humility as an organization, to call people on that cultural humility, and to have that as be a part of our HR process, to be actively engaging. We have always used lots of excuses. Folks of color can apply and work for the state and make $10,000, $20,000 more, which is true. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't actively engage and get people to work at our agency. So it's been, so I think what you said is it calls for a higher level and more courage and audacity that maybe even 3 years ago you could get away with not doing in an open way. So we are, I think that's the path. Buck up is good. Use your head. So,
And your values.
And your values. We are an extraordinarily mission-driven organization. Folks work there because they really care and they want to make a difference. But I think we need to be educated too, and I think that the education then passes down to our children, our families, and we need to be the leaders of that as an organization.
I guess the other comment that we had a lot of conversation about internally is that the world around us might have changed, but we haven't changed. Right. Our values are still the same. What's important to us is still the same. That hasn't changed. And as leaders, we have an obligation to fight for those values.
I think, I'll just add my own comment to this, maybe answering my own question, but I think that that it is, as I said in my remarks, it is a values question. It is, in a way that we haven't been thinking about it, it is less a question of political leadership and more a question of moral leadership. And if it's truly an issue of hearts and minds that we're talking about, what changes hearts and minds really is moral leadership, not political leadership. Political leaders follow the hearts and minds of the people, generally speaking. And I put President Trump in this category. He was not a political leader until 2000.